Um, hey, welcome back. I'm going to connect our Instagram live, and then Angie is going to come here and share God's word with us. We're picking up in
2 Samuel 9.
2 Samuel chapter 9. All right, looks like we're all live. Angie, you can come up. Thank you.
All right.
No, you're good. I'm leaving. You're safe. Plus we're online.
Okay, so picking back up,
Yeah.
second book of Samuel, chapter 9.
See you, bro. Appreciate you. Hey.
David asked, "Is there anyone remaining from the family of Saul I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" There was a servant of Saul's family named Ziba. They summoned him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "I am your servant," he replied. So the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show the kindness of God to?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son, who was injured in both feet." The king asked him, "Where is he?" Ziba answered the king, "You'll find him in Lo-debar at the house of Machir, son of Amiel." So King David had him brought from the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell face down, and paid homage. David said, "Mephibosheth, I am your servant," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "since I intend to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all your grandfather Saul's fields, and you will always eat meals at my table." Mephibosheth paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you take an interest in a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Saul's attendant Ziba and said to him, "I have given to your master's grandson all that belonged to Saul and his family. You, your sons, and your servants are to work the ground for him, and you are to bring in the crops, so your master's grandson will have food to eat." But Mephibosheth, this was a hard one for me. Yes,
That one is a hard one.
Mephibosheth, "Your master's grandson is always to eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do all my lord the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table just like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. All those living in Ziba's house were Mephibosheth's servants. However, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. His feet had been injured. Sometime later, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun became king in his place. Then David said, "I'll show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me." So David sent his emissaries to console Hanun concerning his father. However, when they arrived in the land of the Ammonites, the Ammonite leaders said to Hanun, their lord, "Just because David has sent men with condolences for you, do you really believe he's showing respect for your father? Instead, hasn't David sent his emissaries in order to scout out the city, spy on it, and demolish it?" So Hanun took David's emissaries, shaved off half their beards, cut their clothes in half at the hips, and sent them away. When this was reported to David, he sent someone to meet them, since they were deeply humiliated. The king said, "Stay in Jericho until your beards grow back, then return." When the Ammonites realized they had become repulsive to David, they hired 20,000 foot soldiers from the Arameans of Beth Rehob and Zobah, 1,000 men from the king of Maacah, and 12,000 men from Tob. David heard about it and sent Joab and all the elite troops. The Ammonites marched out and lined up in battle formation at the entrance to the city gate, while the Arameans of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah were in the fields by themselves. When Joab saw that there was a battle line in front of him and another behind him, he chose some of Israel's finest young men and lined up in formation to engage the Arameans. He placed the rest of the forces under the command of his brother Abishai. They lined up in formation to engage the Ammonites. "If the Arameans are too strong for me," Joab said, "then you will be my help. However, if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I'll come to help you. Be strong. Let's prove ourselves strong for our people and for the cities of our God. May the Lord's will be done. Joab and his troops advanced to fight against the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites saw that the Arameans had fled, they too fled before Abishai and entered the city. So Joab withdrew from the attack against the Ammonites and went to Jerusalem. When the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer sent messengers to bring the Arameans who were beyond the Euphrates River, and they came to Helam with Shobach, commander of Hadazer's army, leading them. When this was reported to David, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Helam. Then the Arameans lined up to engage David in battle and fought against him. But the Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobach, commander of their army, who died there. When all the kings who were Hadadezer's subjects saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became their subjects. After this, the Arameans were afraid to ever help the Ammonites again. In the spring, when kings march out to war, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and strolled around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, a very beautiful woman. So David sent someone to inquire about her, and he said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to him, he slept with her. Now she had just been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Afterward she returned home. The woman conceived and sent word to inform David, "I am pregnant." David sent orders to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab and the troops were doing and how the war was going. Then he said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and the gift from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the door of the palace with all his master's servants. He did not go down to his house. When it was reported to David, Uriah didn't go home. David questioned Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a journey? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah answered David, "The ark, Israel, and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my master Joab and his soldiers are camping in the open field. How can I enter my house to eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As surely as you live, and by your life, I will not do this." "Stay here today also," David said to Uriah, "and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited Uriah to eat and drink with him, and David got him drunk. He went out in the evening to lie down on his cot with his master's servants, but he did not go home. The next morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Put Uriah at the front of the fiercest fighting, then withdraw from him, so that he is struck down and dies." When Joab was besieging the city, he put Uriah in the place where he knew the best enemy soldiers were. Then the men of the city came out and attacked Joab, and some of the men from David's soldiers fell in battle. Uriah the Hittite also died. Joab sent someone to report to David all the details of the battle. He commanded the messenger, "When you finish telling the king all the details of the battle, if the king's anger gets stirred up and he asks you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you realize they would shoot from the top of the wall at Thebez, who struck Abimelech's son of Jerubbesheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the top of the wall so that he died? Why did you get so close to the wall?' Then say, 'Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also.'" Then the messenger left. When he arrived, he reported to David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger reported to David, "The men gained the advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we counterattacked right up to the entrance of the city gate. However, the archers shot down on your servants from the top of the wall, and some of the king's servants died. Your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab. Don't let this matter upset you, because the sword devours all alike. Intensify your fight against the city and demolish it. Encourage him. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah had died, she mourned for him. When the time of mourning ended, David had her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. However, the Lord considered what David had done to be evil. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. When he arrived, he said to him, "There were 2 men in a certain city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very large flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one small ewe lamb that he had bought. He raised her, and she grew up with him and with his children. From his meager food she would eat. From his cup she would drink, and in his arms she would sleep. She was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man could not bring himself to take one of his sheep or cattle to prepare for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for his guest." David was infuriated with the man and said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. Because he has done this thing and shown no pity, he must pay 4 lambs for that lamb." Nathan replied to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I rescued you from Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that was not enough, I would have given you even more. Why then have you despised the Lord's command by doing what I consider evil? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife as your own wife. You murdered him with the Ammonites' sword. Now, therefore, the sword will never leave your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah to the Hittite to be your own wife. This is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on you from your own family. I will take your wives and give them to another before your very eyes, and he will sleep with them in broad daylight. You acted in secret, but I will do this before all Israel and in broad daylight." David responded to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Then Nathan replied to David, "And the Lord has taken away your sin. You will not die. However, because you treated the Lord with such contempt in this matter, the son born to you will die." Then Nathan went home. The Lord struck the baby that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became deathly ill. David pleaded with God for the boy. He fasted, went home, and spent the night lying on the ground. The elders of his house stood beside him to get up from the ground, but he was unwilling and would not eat anything with them. On the 7th day the baby died, but David's servants were afraid to tell him the baby was dead. They said, "Look, while the baby was alive, we spoke to him, and he wouldn't listen to us. So how can we tell him the baby is dead? He may do something desperate." When David saw that his servants were whispering to each other, he guessed that the baby was dead. So he asked his servants, "Is the baby dead?" "He is dead," they replied. Then David got up from the ground. He washed, anointed himself, changed his clothes, went to the Lord's house, and worshipped. Then he went home and requested something to eat. So they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, "Why have you done this? While the baby was alive, you fasted and wept, but when he died, you got up and ate food." He answered, "While the baby was alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, 'Who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let him live.' But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I'll go to him, but he will never return to me." Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and slept with her. She gave birth to a son and named him Solomon. The Lord loved him, and he sent a message through the prophet Nathan, who named him Jedidiah because of the Lord. Joab fought against Rabbah of the Ammonites and captured the royal fortress. Then Joab sent messengers to David to say, "I have fought against Rabbah and have also captured its water supply. Now, therefore, assemble the rest of the troops, lay siege to the city and capture it. Otherwise, I will be the one to capture the city, and it will be named after me." So David assembled all the troops and went to Rabbah. He fought against it and captured it. He took the crown from the head of their king, and it was placed on David's head. The crown weighed 75 pounds of gold, and it had a precious stone in it. In addition, David took away a large quantity of plunder from the city. He removed the people who were in the city and put them to work with saws, iron picks, and iron axes, and to labor at brickmaking. He did the same to all the Ammonite cities. Then he and all his troops returned to Jerusalem. Some time passed. David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and David's son Amnon was infuriated with her. Amnon was frustrated to the point of making himself sick over his sister Tamar because she was a virgin, but it seemed impossible to do anything to her. Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, a son of David's brother Shimea. Jonadab was a very shrewd man, and he asked Amnon, "Why are you, the king's son, so miserable every morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon replied, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend you're sick. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare a meal in my presence, so I can watch and eat from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my presence, so I can eat from her hand." David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Please go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare a meal for him." Then Tamar went to his house while Amnon was lying down. She took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his presence, and baked them. She brought the pan and set it down in front of him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, "Everyone leave me," and everyone left him. "Bring the meal to the bedroom," Amnon told Tamar, "so I can eat from your hand." Tamar took the cakes she had made and went to her brother Amnon's bedroom. When she brought them to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come sleep with me, my sister." "Don't, my brother," she cried. "Don't disgrace me, for such a thing should never be done in Israel. Don't commit this outrage. Where could I ever go with my humiliation? And you would be like one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Please speak to the king, for he won't keep me from you." But he refused to listen to her, and because he was stronger than she was, he disgraced her by raping her. So Amnon hated Tamar with such intensity that the hatred he hated her with was greater than the love he had loved her with. "Get out of here," he said. "No," she cried, "sending me away is much worse than the great wrong you've already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. Instead, he called to the servant who waited on him, "Get this away from me, throw her out, and bolt the door behind her." Amnon's servant threw her out and bolted the door behind her. Now Tamar was wearing a long-sleeved garment because this is what the king's virgin daughters wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long-sleeved garment she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, crying out. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has your brother Amnon been with you?" "Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." So Tamar lived as a desolate woman in the house of her brother Absalom. When King David heard about all these things, he was furious. Absalom didn't say anything to Amnon, either good or bad, because he hated Amnon since he disgraced his sister Tamar. 2 years later, Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal Hazor, near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Then he went to the king and said, "Your servant has just hired sheep shearers. Will the king and his servants please come with your servant?" The king replied to Absalom, "No, my son, we shall not all go, or it would be a burden to you." Although Absalom urged him, he wasn't willing to go, though he did bless him. "If not," Absalom said, "please let my brother Amnon go with us." The king asked him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom urged him, so he sent Amnon and all the king's sons. Now Absalom commanded his young men, "Watch Amnon until he is in a good mood from the wine. When I order you to strike Amnon, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Am I not the one who has commanded you? Be strong and valiant." So Absalom's young men did to Amnon just as Absalom had commanded. Then all the rest of the king's sons got up and each fled on his mule. While they were on the way, a report reached David. Absalom struck down all the king's sons. Not even one of them survived. In response, the king stood up, tore his clothes, and lay down on the ground, and all his servants stood by with their clothes torn. But Jonadab, son of David's brother Shimei, spoke up. "My lord must not think they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, because only Amnon is dead. In fact, Absalom has planned this ever since the day Amnon disgraced his sister Tamar. So now, my lord, the king, don't take seriously the report that says all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead." Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. When the young man who was standing watch looked up, there were many people coming from the road west of him, from the side of the mountain. Jonadab said to the king, "Look, the king's sons have come. It's exactly like your servant said. Just as he finished speaking, the king's sons entered and wept loudly. Then the king and all his servants also wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. After Absalom had fled to Geshur and had been there 3 years, King David longed to go to Absalom, for David had finished grieving over Amnon's death. Joab, son of Zeruiah, realized that the king's mind was on Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa to bring a wise woman from there. He told her, "Pretend to be in mourning, dress in mourning clothes, and don't put on any oil. Act like a woman who has been mourning for the dead for a long time. Go to the king and speak these words to him." Then Joab told her exactly what to say. When the woman from Tekoa came to the king, she fell face down to the ground, paid homage, and said, "Help me, your majesty." "What's the matter?" the king asked her. "Sadly, I am a widow. My husband died," she said. "Your servant had 2 sons. They were fighting in the field with no one to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant and said, 'Hand over the one who killed his brother, so we may put him to death for the life of the brother he murdered. We will eliminate the heir.' They would extinguish my one remaining ember, but by not preserving my husband's name or posterity on earth." The king told the woman, "Go home. I will issue a command on your behalf." Then the woman of Tekoa said to the king, "My lord, the king, may any blame be on me and my father's family, and may the king and his throne be innocent?" "Whoever speaks to you," the king said, "bring him to me. He will not trouble you again." She replied, "Please, may the king invoke the Lord your God, so that the avenger of blood will not increase the loss, and they will not eliminate my son. As the Lord lives," he vowed, "not a hair of your son will fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Please, may your servant speak a word to my lord the king?" "Speak," he replied. The woman asked, "Why have you devised something similar against the people of God? When the king spoke as he did about this matter, he has pronounced his own guilt. The king has not brought back his own banished one. We will certainly die and be like water poured out on the ground, which can't be recovered. But God would not take away a life. He would devise plans so that the one banished from him does not remain banished. Now, therefore, I come to present this matter to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. Your servant thought, I must speak to the king. Perhaps the king will grant his servant's request. The king will surely listen in order to keep his servant from the grasp of this man who would eliminate both me and my son from God's inheritance. Your servant thought, may the word of my lord the king bring relief? For my lord the king is able to discern the good and the bad like the angel of God. May the Lord your God be with you." Then the king answered the woman, "I'm going to ask you something. Don't conceal it from me." "Let my lord the king speak," the woman replied. The king asked, "Did Joab put you up to all this?" The woman answered, "As you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or left from all the lord the king says. Yes, your servant Joab is the one who gave orders to me. He told your servant exactly what to say. Joab, your servant, has done this to address the issue indirectly. But my lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God, knowing everything on earth." Then the king said to Joab, "I hereby grant this request. Go, bring back the young man Absalom." Joab fell with his face to the ground in homage and blessed the king. "Today," Joab said, "your servant knows I have found favor with you, my lord the king, because the king has granted the request of your servant." So Joab got up, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. However, the king added, "He may return to his house, but he may not see my face." So Absalom returned to his house, but he did not see the king. No man in all Israel was as handsome and highly praised as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the top of his head, he did not have a single flaw. When he shaved his head, he shaved it at the end of every year, because his hair got so heavy for him that he had to shave it off. He would weigh the hair from his head, and it would be 5 pounds, according to the royal standard. 3 sons were born to Absalom, and a daughter named Tamar, who was a beautiful woman. Absalom resided in Jerusalem 2 years, but never saw the king. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab was unwilling to come to him. So he sent again a second time, but he still would not come. Then Absalom said to his servants, "See, Joab has a field right next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set fire to it." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab came to Absalom's house and demanded, "Why did your servants set my field on fire?" "Look," Absalom explained to Joab, "I sent for you and said, 'Come here.' I want to send you to the king to ask, 'Why have I come back from Geshur? I'd be better off if I were still there. So now let me see the king. If I am guilty, let him kill me.'" Joab went to the king and told him. So David summoned Absalom, who came to the king and paid homage with his face to the ground before him. Then the king kissed Absalom. So I'm going to leave off 2 Samuel chapter 15.
Didn't that go so fast?
It did.
I mean,
It was surprising.
All 5 of us are going to read.
let's go.
Yay. But I'm going to have to get a
Hey, how are you
chair.
doing?
It's
So.
been good.
It has been good. It's been good, on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and just reading scripture.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
So you still going, or is there?
Yeah, we are 24 hours in, and we have 50 and a half hours to go.
Wow.
So we're just doing it around the clock. 74 and a half hours.
Stick you
Hopefully
over.
we'll finish us from Genesis to Revelation. I didn't get a picture of you, Angie.
Oh.
I know.
We're praying somebody gets saved out
I know. I was thinking about that.
Appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Okay, hello, Greenhouse Church.
Yay.
So we're going to let Peyton read a little bit. She's so excited, aren't you? She couldn't wait to come do this. Okay, so we're right here. 2 Samuel 15 is where we're starting. Read loud.
After this,
Absalom
Absalom, he got himself a
chariot.
chariot, horses, and 15 men to run before him. He would get up early and stand beside the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone had a
grievance
to bring before the king for
settlement.
Absalom called out to him and asked, "What city are you from?" He replied, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Absalom said to him, "Look, your claims are good and right, but the king does not have anyone to listen to you." He added, "Only if someone would appoint me judge in the land, then anyone who had a grievance or dispute could come to me, and I would make sure he received justice." When a person approached to pay homage to him, Absalom reached out his hand, took hold of him, and kissed him. Absalom did this to all the Israelites who came to the king for a settlement. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. When 4 years had passed, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to
Hebron
to fulfill
fulfill
a vow I made to the Lord. For your servant made a vow when I lived in gesture of
Aram,
saying, if the Lord really brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron. Go in peace," the king said to him. So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent
Agents.
throughout the tribes of Israel with this message. When you hear the sound of ram's horns, you are to say, Absalom has become the king in
Hebron.
200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom. They had been invited to were going innocently, for they did not know the whole situation. While he was offering the sacrifices, Absalom sent for David's advisor
Ahithophel,
the
Gilonite,
Gilonite, from his city of Gilo. So the conspiracy grew stronger, and the people support Absalom continued to increase. Then an information came to David and reported the hearts of the men of Israel with all Absalom. David said to all the servants with him in
Jerusalem,
"Get up, we have to flee, or we will not escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, or he will overtake as quickly.
Heap
disaster on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword."
Okay. You want to let Darcy have a turn? You want to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
The king's servant said to the king, "Whatever, my lord, the king decides, we are your servants." And then the king set out, and his entire household followed him, but he left behind 10
concubines
to take care of the palace. So the king set out, and all the people followed him. They stopped at the last house, while all his servants marched past him. Then all the Cherethites and
the Pelethites
and the people of Gath, 600 men who came with him from there, marched past the king. The king said to Ittai of Gath, "Why are you also going with us? Go back and stay with the new king, since you're both the
foreigner
and
exile
from your homeland. Besides, you only arrived yesterday. Should I make you wander around with us today while we go wherever I can? Go back and take your brothers with you. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness."
Okay. All right. We're going to switch.
Okay.
Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome.
Good job. Okay, come on.
But in response, Ittai vowed to the king, "As the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king is, whether it means life or death, your servant will be there." March on, David replied to Ittai. So Ittai and Gathmod marched past with all his friends, or all his men, and the dependents who were with him. Everyone in the countryside was weeping loudly while all the people were marching out of the city. As the king was crossing the Kidron Valley, all the people were marching past on the road that leads to the wilderness. Zadok was also there, and all the Levites with him were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. They set the Ark of God down, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until the people had finished marching past. Then the king instructed Zadok, "Return the Ark of God to the city. If I find favor with the Lord, he will bring me back and allow me to see both it and its dwelling place. However, if he should say, 'I do not delight in you,' then here I am. He can do with me whatever pleases him." The king also said to the priest Zadok, "Look, return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, your son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Remember, I'll wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar returned the Ark of God to Jerusalem and stayed there. David was climbing the slope of the Mount Olives, weeping as he ascended. His head was covered, and he was walking barefoot. All of the people with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they ascended. Then someone reported to David,
Ahithophel
is among the conspirators with Absalom. "Lord," David pleaded, "please turn the counsel of
Ahithophel
into foolishness." When David came to the summit where he used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go away with me, you'll be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and tell Absalom, I will be your servant, your majesty. Previously I was your father's servant, but now I want to be your servant. Then you can counteract Ahithophel's counsel for me. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Report everything you hear from the palace to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. Take note, their 2 sons are with them. Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Send them to tell me everything you hear." So Hushai, David's personal advisor, entered Jerusalem just as Absalom was entering the city.
You done? Okay, Reg. We're starting 2 Samuel 16.
When David had gone a little beyond the summit,
Read loud.
When David had gone a little beyond the summit, Ziba, Mephibosheth's servant, was right there to meet him. He had a pair of saddled donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of summer fruit, and a clay jar of wine. The king said to Ziba, "Why do you have these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, the bread and summer fruit are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who become exhausted in the wilderness." "Where is your master's grandson?" the king asked. "Why, he's staying in Jerusalem," Ziba replied to the king. For he said, "Today the house of Israel will restore my grandfather's kingdom to me." The king said to Ziba, "All that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I bow before you," Ziba said. "May I find favor with you, my lord the king." When King David got to Bahurim, a man belonging to the family of the house of Saul was just coming out. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he was yelling curses as he approached. He threw stones at David and at all the royal servants, the people, and the warriors on David's right and left. Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed, you wicked man. The Lord has paid you back for all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place he became king. And the Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son, Absalom. Look, you are in trouble because you are a man of bloodshed." Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and remove his head." The king replied, "Sons of Zeruiah, do we agree on anything? He curses me this way because the Lord told him, 'Curse David.' Therefore, who can say, 'Why did you do that?'" Then David said to Abishai and all his servants, "Look, my own son, my own flesh and blood, intends to take my life. How much more now this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse me. The Lord has told him to. Perhaps the Lord will see my affliction and restore goodness to me instead of Shimei's curses today." So David and his men proceeded along the road as Shimei was going along the ridge of the hill opposite him. As Shimei went, he cursed David, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust. Finally, the king and all the people with him arrived exhausted, so they rested there. Now Absalom and all of the Israelites came to Jerusalem. Ahithophel was also with him. When David's friends, Hushai the Archite, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." "Is this your loyalty to your friend?" Absalom asked Hushai. "Why didn't you go with your friend?" "Not at all," Hushai answered Absalom. I am on the side of the one that the Lord, this people, and all the men of Israel have chosen. I will stay with him. Furthermore, whom will I serve if not his son? As I served in your father's presence, I will also serve you." Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give me your advice. What should we do?" Ahithophel replied to Absalom, "Sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. When all Israel hears that you have become repulsive to your father, everyone with you will be encouraged." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. Now the advice Ahithophel gave in those days was like someone asking about a word from God. Such was the regard that both David and Absalom had for Ahithophel's advice. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will set out in pursuit of David tonight. I will attack him while he is weary and discouraged, throw him into a panic, and all the people with him will scatter. I will strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. When everyone returns except the man you are looking for, all the people will be at peace." This proposal seemed right to Absalom and the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, "Summon Hushai the Archite also. Let's hear what he has to say as well." So Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom told him, "Ahithophel offered this proposal. Should we carry out his proposal? If not, what do you say?" Hushai replied to Absalom, "The advice Ahithophel has given this time is not good." Hushai continued, "You know your father and his men. They are warriors and are desperate, like a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Your father is an experienced soldier who won't spend the night with the people. He's probably already hiding in one of the caves or some other place. And some of our troops fall. First, someone is sure to hear and say, 'There's been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom.' Then even a brave man with the heart of a lion will lose heart. because all Israel knows that your father and the valiant men with him are warriors. Instead, I advise that all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand by the sea, be gathered to you, and that you personally go into battle. Then we will attack David wherever we find him, and we will descend on him like dew on the ground. Not even one will be left, neither he nor any of the men with him. If he retreats to some city, all Israel will bring ropes to that city and will drag its stones into the valley until not even a pebble can be found there. Since the Lord has decreed that Ahithophel's good advice be undermined in order to bring out Absalom's ruin, Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than Ahithophel's advice." Hushai then told the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "This is what Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel, and this is what I advise. Now send someone quickly and tell David, don't spend the night at the wilderness ford, but be sure to cross over the Jordan, or the king and all his people with him will be devoured." Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at On Rogel, where a servant girl would come and pass along information to them. They in turn would go and inform King David, because they dared not to be seen entering the city. However, a young man did see them and informed Absalom. So the two left quickly and came to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. Then his wife took cover, placed it over the mouth of the well, and scattered grain on it so nobody would know anything. Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and asked, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" "They passed by towards the water," the woman replied to them. The men searched but did not find them, so they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, Ahimaaz and Jonathan climbed out of the well and went and informed King David. They told him, "Get up and immediately ford the river, for Ahithophel has given this advice against you." So David and all the people with him got up and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak there was no one who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel realized that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He set his house in order and hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. David had arrived at Mahanaim by the time Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in Joab's place. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra the Israelite. Ithra had married Abigail, daughter of Nahash. Abigail was a sister to Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Israel and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, Mashir, son of Amiel, from Lodebar, and Barzillai from the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and pottery items. They also brought wheat, barley, flour, roasted grain, beans, lentil, honey, curds, sheep, goats, and cheese from the herd for David and the people with him to eat. They had reasoned, "The people must be hungry, exhausted, and thirsty in the wilderness." David reviewed his troops and appointed commanders of thousands of hundreds over them. He then set out the troops, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai of Gath. The king said to the troops, "I must also march out with you." "You must not go," the people pleaded. "If we have to flee, they will not pay any attention to us. Even if half of us died, they will not pay any attention to us because you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better if you support us from the city." "I will do whatever you think is best," the kings replied to them. So he stood beside the city gate while all the thousands of troops marched out by hundreds and thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, treat the young man Absalom gently for my sake. All the people heard the king's orders to all the commanders about Absalom. Then David's forces marched into the field to engage Israel in battle, which took place in the forest of Ephraim. Israel's army was defeated by David's soldiers, and the slaughter there was vast that day, 20,000 dead. The battle spread over the entire area, and that day the force claimed more people than the sword.
Can I show you real quick? All right. Excuse me, let me just interrupt to show Justin how to do Instagram Live. So if we go down here to this one. Man, we're going to have to end it. Go ahead and end it. End the video. Discard video. Discard.
So you have to do that every time you have to
Yes.
this, but okay.
Every time. Hit create. Go to live video. Put a title in there. Just click one of those. Click audience. Public. Next. And then
So will it tell me it's in it?
it'll tell you right here. It'll say reconnecting. That's how you know it's not